Fedor Emelianenko is a Russian icon, a man Putin once called a national treasure. Even his enemies respected him. But today, his name is despised in his own country. Why? Because of one decision branded as betrayal. Why did the Kremlin turn its back on him? Why was he attacked in the State Duma? And how did an MMA legend become an enemy of the people? The shocking truth of how Fedor lost Russia. In February 2022, when the world changed forever, people expected very different words from Fedor Emelianenko. His entire biography, a modest native of Rubizhny, Ukraine, raised in the traditions of the Russian army, a sports icon personally decorated by the president, seemed to prepare him for the role of a voice of patriotic euphoria. Everyone anticipated a loud, uncompromising statement in support of Russia's actions. They expected the last emperor, whose image for decades had been built on strength, discipline, and loyalty, to lead the chorus of nationwide approval. But instead, something happened that shocked everyone. A week after the events began, Fedor published a statement that was neither condemnation nor approval, but a quiet, deeply human appeal. He did not speak about politics, strategy, or ideology. He spoke about children. He urged people to remember that innocent lives were being in Russia. His statement was seen not as humanism, but as betrayal at the most critical moment. State Duma Deputy Vitaly Milanov, known for his harsh and uncompromising rhetoric, became the loudest voice of condemnation. He publicly demanded that Fedor be stripped of all honorary titles and state awards, declaring that a man who symbolizes Russian strength and spirit has no right to preach abstract humanism when the fate of the motherland is at stake. His words about Emelianenko pouring water on the enemy's mill became a sentence. He was accused of providing propaganda ammunition to the West. His words, ripped from context, used to discredit Russia and its actions. For millions of former fans, Fedor instantly transformed from a living symbol of national pride into a traitor, a spent card in an information war. His silent yet weighty call for peace proved far more dangerous than a loud endorsement of war. He committed the unforgivable act. He remained human when people expected him to be a soldier. The true tragedy of Fedor unfolded not in the halls of power, but in the hearts of those who had idolized him for years. The harshest blow came from his fans, the same people who had once decorated their walls with his posters, quoted his interviews, and saw in him the embodiment of Russian strength and spirit. Within days, the Russian internet turned from a territory of glory into a battlefield of condemnation. On major sports forums like Sherdod and Russian MMA threads once dedicated to his career filled with angry comments. He was no longer called the last emperor. Now he was branded a traitor and a Judas. Memes of him, depicted as a soldier fleeing the battlefield, went viral in the same groups that had once celebrated his greatest knockouts. The most painful expression of public rage was the mass deletion of his fight videos. Administrators of popular YouTube channels and VK communities, who had earned millions of views from his victories, began erasing archives one after another. In the comments on the few remaining videos, thousands demanded, "Delete the traitor." It was not just a boycott, it was a symbolic execution, an erasure of a legend by his own supporters. The most personal and devastating blow came from his own brother, Alexander Emelianenko, who had always lived in his shadow, but now saw the opportunity to speak out. In a video address posted on his Telegram channel, which had gathered hundreds of thousands of subscribers, Alexander coldly denounced his brother. "At a time like this, you stand with the people, not talk about abstract peace," he said, staring directly into the camera. "Real men make a choice. They don't deliver pretty words for a Western audience." These words cut especially deep, given their complicated history and the fact that Fedor had often supported Alexander through his darkest times. This public rebuke from his own brother was a signal to many. If even blood disowned him, then the betrayal must be real. The statement finally split the Russian MMA world between those who quietly respected Fedor's stance and those who now saw him as a renegade. For Fedor, who had always valued family and loyalty above all, it was the cruelest blow to realize that his own kin would use his moral struggle as fuel for their own popularity in a changing political climate. Perhaps the most painful and symbolic blow was the silence of the Kremlin. For years, Fedor Emelianenko had been more than just an athlete. He was a living embodiment of state patriotism. His image had been built around service, ambassador of Russian sport, a symbol of military values, a man whose humility and strength represented the ideal Russian warrior. Countless photographs of him receiving awards from the president were not just personal milestones, but part of a larger political narrative where he played his assigned role. That is why the decision to simply ignore him carried such heavy symbolic weight. His name disappeared overnight from the guest lists of official events tied to sports or patriotic education. TV channels, which had only recently aired documentaries about his rise to glory, were quietly instructed to stop showing footage of him. He was no longer invited to the programs where he had once been a welcome role model. The most tangible blow came in his work. His charity foundation, which had supported children with severe illnesses for years, suddenly faced insurmountable administrative barriers. State funding, which made up a large part of its budget, was first temporarily frozen for review and later completely cut under the pretext of budget optimization. Regulatory inspections followed one after another, paralyzing the organization's work. In effect, the foundation, his life's passion, was pushed to the brink of collapse. The same fate befell his promotion company, M1 Global. Tournaments that once enjoyed top-level backing and were broadcast on federal channels suddenly became targets of relentless scrutiny. Tax audits, surprise inspections for immigration compliance regarding foreign fighters, bureaucratic obstacles in scheduling events, all of it created unbearable working conditions. It felt as though the powerful state machine that had once lifted him up had now turned against him, not by striking directly, but by slowly suffocating him with bureaucracy. For Fedor, a man of principle and loyalty, this total estrangement from the country he had served with all his heart was the harshest blow of all. He found himself in a paradox. His only crime was staying true to his human principles at a time when people demanded not humanity, but absolute loyalty. Fedor Emelianenko, a man accustomed to honest dialogue in the ring, was utterly unprepared for the way his words, spoken with the best of intentions, would be twisted and used against him. Believing in reason and humanity, he thought his reputation and decades-long image as a man of peace would allow him to convey a simple truth: that innocents suffer on both sides of any war. In private, he later admitted he expected criticism but not the total destruction of everything he had built. His later interviews resembled attempts to defend himself before a court that had already passed judgment. His voice, once calm and authoritative, often broke into a near whisper as he tried to explain his stance. "I only wanted good," he repeated, and in those words one could hear not only confusion, but the deep pain of a man whom people had simply refused to hear. War is grief for everyone. Who can argue with that? Yet in the new reality, it was precisely this that people argued against. His humanism was declared weakness, his call for peace, betrayal. The tragedy was that the same public that once revered him for his unshakable resilience in battle now demanded the same ruthless resolve in matters of life and death. The image of the last emperor, carefully built over his career, the wise, calm, undefeated warrior with a philosophical outlook on life, collapsed overnight, not because he had changed, but because the rules of the game had. People no longer wanted wisdom. They wanted slogans, not compassion, but unconditional loyalty. He wasn't simply unheard. He was dismantled as a symbol. What had made him great, his principles, his belief in absolute values, his refusal to play by the rules of show business, now became his greatest vulnerability. He found himself the last knight in a war where chivalry was treated as treason. His downfall was all the more painful because he witnessed his legacy, his honor, and his good name not merely questioned, but systematically dismantled by the very people who had once given him standing ovations. He went into battle with his visor up and was struck from behind. And it was this betrayal, more than any defeat in the cage, that broke him. Fedor Emelianenko hasn't changed. Russia has. His tragedy is that he remained a man of honor in a time when honor became a commodity. His ultimate betrayal was not turning his back on the country, but the country turning its back on its own ideals. Now, he lives in the shadow of past glory, a hero who became inconvenient. If this video gets 50K likes, we'll investigate how the special operation split the MMA world in Russia.